Number 2. Winchester, the shirt maker. With no gun experience, who built the rifle that won the West? The man whose name is stamped on the rifle that won the American West never designed a gun. He had never fired one in combat, never worked a forge, never cut a barrel or fitted an action into a stock. Oliver Fisher. Winchester made shirts. He was born in Boston in November 1810 into a family with almost nothing. His father died when Oliver was an infant. He grew up working, first on farms, then as a carpenter, then in the clothing trade, the way poor boys in early America grew up if they were going to amount to anything. By his late 30s, he had a business in New Haven, Connecticut, making men's dress shirts. In 1848, he patented a small change in the way a shirt was cut, a curved seam that let the collar sit cleanly against the neck. It sounds like nothing. It made him a fortune. The factory employed hundreds of workers and shipped its shirts across the eastern states, and by every measure that counted in 1850, Oliver Winchester was a clothing manufacturer who would live and die a clothing manufacturer. Then he put his money into a company that built a gun almost nobody wanted. The gun was the Volcanic, and the idea behind it was older than the men usually credited with it. A New York inventor named Walter Hunt had sketched the concept around 1849. A bullet with its powder sealed inside a hollow base and a lever that fed one round after another, and the design passed through several hands before it reached Horace Smith and Daniel Wesson, two gun makers who would each become famous on their own. The Volcanic fired that hollow base bullet, a self-contained round that needed no separate cartridge case. The idea was clever and ahead of its time. A shooter could fire shot after shot by working a lever in an age when nearly every other firearm on Earth fired once and then had to be reloaded by hand. The trouble was the ammunition. That little bullet held a powder charge far too weak to be useful. The Volcanic could shoot fast, and it could not shoot hard. A repeating gun that fired feeble rounds was a curiosity, and the Volcanic Repeating Arms Company, founded in 1855, was losing money within 2 years. Oliver Winchester was one of its largest stockholders. In 1857, when the company failed, he did something that looks reckless on paper and turned out to be the most important decision of his life. He bought it. He bought the patents, the tooling, the inventory, the whole broken operation, and put it back together under a new name, the New Haven Arms Company. About firearms, he knew nothing. About manufacturing, he knew a great deal. About meeting a payroll. About turning a workshop into a factory, and a factory into a profit. The repeating gun, he had decided, was the future. He was right about the gun and wrong about the timing, and the distance between those two things nearly ruined him before it made him. One quick word before we go on. If you find these stories worth your time, the histories of the people and companies that shaped the modern world without ever becoming household names, take a second to subscribe. It costs you nothing, and it tells me to keep making them. Now, back to a man sitting on a warehouse full of guns that did not work. What the New Haven Arms Company owned was a good mechanism married to a bad cartridge. What it needed was someone who could fix the cartridge, and Winchester found him inside his own factory. Benjamin Tyler Henry was the plant superintendent, a gunsmith and toolmaker who had spent years in the New England arms trade. Between 1858 and 1860, Henry set out to solve the problem that had killed the Volcanic. He designed a new metallic cartridge, a copper case holding a .44 caliber bullet over a real charge of powder fired by a ring of priming compound around the rim of its base. The rimfire .44 Henry round had the power the Volcanic never had. Then he built a rifle around it. The Henry rifle, patented in October 1860, was a lever-action repeater that held 15 rounds in a tube under the barrel and one more in the chamber. 16 shots. A man could empty all 16 in under half a minute and refill the tube faster than a soldier with a musket could load a single ball. The timing could not have been sharper. 6 months after the patent, the country tore itself in two. When the Civil War began in 1961, the Union Army was slow to take the Henry seriously. The Ordnance Department distrusted repeaters and worried that troops would burn through ammunition, so the Army bought relatively few of them through official channels. Soldiers bought them anyway. A Henry cost a Union infantryman around $40, a real chunk of a year's pay, and thousands of men spent the money out of their own pockets because a repeating rifle was the difference between living and dying when the shooting started. The 7th Illinois Infantry armed itself with Henrys at its own expense and tore through Confederate lines that expected single-shot fire. The men on the receiving end left a description that stuck. They called it that damned Yankee rifle that you load on Sunday and shoot all week. The Henry was not the only repeater in the war. The Spencer, a 7-shot rifle fed from a tube in the buttstock, reached Union troops in far larger numbers and became a favorite of the cavalry. President Lincoln test-fired a Spencer himself on the grounds near the White House and pressed the Army to take it seriously. Winchester's rifle held more rounds and fired faster, but the Spencer was the one the government bought in quantity. The Henry was not a commercial triumph for the company. It was expensive to build. The open slot along the top of the magazine let in dirt and fouling, and only about 14,000 were ever made. But it settled the question Winchester had bet his money on. The repeating rifle worked. Put a proper cartridge in it, and it was the most effective shoulder weapon on any battlefield in the world. The bet was finally paying. And then the man who had made it pay tried to take the whole company away from him. Benjamin Henry believed, with some justice, that the rifle carrying his name had saved the firm and that he was being underpaid for it. In 1865, while Winchester was traveling abroad, Henry petitioned the Connecticut legislature to change the company's name and hand effective control to himself. Winchester moved fast. He reorganized the business out from under the attempt, reincorporated it, and in 1866 gave it the name it has carried ever since: the Winchester Repeating Arms Company. Benjamin Henry got neither the company nor the recognition he wanted. His name lives on the first rifle and almost nowhere else. The first gun the renamed company produced fixed the Henry's worst weakness. An employee named Nelson King patented a loading gate set into the side of the receiver so a shooter could refill the magazine through a closed port instead of feeding rounds into an exposed slot at the muzzle. King added a wooden forearm as well so the barrel could be held without scorching the hand. The result was the Model 1866. Its brass receiver glowed a warm yellow in the sun, and the men who carried it on the plains called it the Yellow Boy. It sold around the world. Winchester shipped it to Mexico, to the Ottoman Empire, to dealers across Europe and South America. The Ottoman contract gave the rifle its grimmest proof. In 1877, Turkish infantry dug in behind earthworks at Plevna in what is now Bulgaria, used Winchester repeaters to break repeated Russian assaults, cutting down attackers who carried single-shot rifles and could not match the volume of fire coming back at them. The siege dragged on for months, and the carnage at close range became something military observers across Europe studied carefully. A plain demonstration of what massed repeating fire could do to troops advancing in the open. A shirt maker now ran one of the best-known gun companies on earth, and he had still never designed a firearm in his life. He had done the thing a manufacturer is there to do. He found the people who could design, paid them, and equipped them, and put his name on what they made. In 1873 came the rifle the whole legend rests on: the Model. 1873 traded the soft brass frame for stronger iron and later steel, and it was chambered for a new cartridge, the .44-40 Winchester Center Fire. That cartridge is why the gun became part of the country's mythology, and the reason has little to do with the rifle by itself. Colt chambered its single-action Army revolver, the most famous handgun of the era, for the very same .44-40 round. A rancher, a marshal, or an outlaw could now carry a rifle and a pistol that ate identical ammunition. One box of cartridges fed both guns. Out on the plains, where the nearest resupply might be 100 miles off, that was no small thing. It was the line between a weapon you could keep running and a weapon that fell silent the moment one kind of cartridge ran out. Winchester also turned the rifle into an early lesson in branding. The factory test fired barrels and set the most accurate ones aside, stamping them 1 of 1,000 and selling them at a steep premium around $100, when an ordinary 1873 cost a fraction of that. It was a marketing idea decades ahead of its competitors, and it worked so well that the gun and the phrase turned up in Hollywood 70 years later in a 1950 film built around the hunt for one of those rare rifles. The Model 1873 sold in huge numbers, more than 700,000 over its life, and it found its way into the hands of nearly everyone who shaped the popular picture of the West. Settlers carried it. So did the cavalry, the buffalo hunters, the railroad crews, and the families guarding their homesteads. It showed up in so many lives across the territories that a later advertising line called it the gun that won the West. And the phrase took hold so firmly that most people now take it for history rather than salesmanship. The truth is, messier. No single gun won anything. Treaties, railroads, disease, the army, and sheer weight of numbers remade the continent. But when the public reached for one object to stand in for that whole violent process, the Winchester lever gun was the one it chose, and the man who owned that gun was a clothing manufacturer who had never been in a gunfight. By the 1870s, the company was one of the largest employers in New Haven, and Winchester had become a wealthy and well-known man. He was elected lieutenant governor of Connecticut in 1866, the same year he renamed the company, and he gave money to Yale, which put his name on a building. He had crossed the entire distance an American of his century could cross. From a fatherless boy doing farm labor to a manufacturer whose product was known on 4 continents, and he had crossed it twice, once with shirts and once with rifles. For the nation's centennial in 1876, the company brought out the Model 1876, a bigger and stronger version of the lever gun made to handle the heavier cartridges that big game hunters and military buyers wanted. Theodore Roosevelt took Model 1876 rifles on his hunting trips and wrote about them admiringly. The guns went to the Texas Rangers, to the Northwest Mounted Police in Canada, to foreign armies shopping for modern repeaters. There was a second business growing alongside the famous one, and it would outlast every rifle the company ever made. From early on, Winchester did not only build guns, it manufactured the cartridges they fired in enormous quantity, stamping its name on the bases of billions of rounds. A rifle is bought once. The ammunition to feed it is bought again and again, every time a shooter restocks, and a company that sells both collects on the second sale long after the first. Winchester's cartridge works grew into one of the largest in the country, and decades later, when the gun business finally collapsed, it was the ammunition side that endured and kept the name alive. The man who had spotted the worth hidden in a failing rifle works had built, almost as a sideline, the part of the company most likely to outlast him. The rifle also became a fixture of American entertainment, which mattered as much to the legend as anything that happened on a real battlefield. Buffalo Bill Cody carried Winchesters in his Wild West show, the traveling spectacle that sold the story of the frontier to audiences across America and Europe. Annie Oakley shot Winchester rifles in front of those same crowds, hitting targets that seemed impossible and putting the name before millions of people who would never own a gun. By the time motion pictures arrived, the lever-action Winchester was already shorthand for the cowboy, the lawman, and the open country, and the movies simply made the association permanent. There is a part of this story the advertising never mentioned. The Winchester fortune was built on a product made to kill, sold during decades when the United States was driving native nations off their land by force, and shipped to armies and factions around the world with little concern for what they did with it once the invoice cleared. The company did well in the same rhythm every arms maker does well. When there was conflict, there was demand. The repeating rifle that defended a homestead was the same repeating rifle used to seize the land that homestead stood on. Oliver Winchester does not seem to have lost much sleep over the contradiction. He was a businessman of his century, and his century paid him handsomely. He died in December 1980. At 70, one of the richest men in Connecticut. Control of the company and a large block of its stock passed toward his son, William Wirt Winchester. Then came the strangest chapter in the family's history, and it began with grief. William Wirt Winchester died of tuberculosis in March 1981, only a few months after his father. His widow, Sarah Winchester, inherited a great fortune and close to half the company's shares. The income alone came to something like $1,000 a day, in an era when a laboring man might make that in a year. Sarah had already buried an infant daughter years earlier. Now she had lost her husband and her father-in-law within months of each other. According to the story that grew up around her, a medium told the widow that her family was being haunted by the spirits of everyone the Winchester rifle had killed, and that she could keep death away only by building, without stopping, for the rest of her life. Whether she believed exactly that, or whether the legend tidied up a more private grief, Sarah Winchester moved to California and began building a house that never stopped being built. Carpenters worked in shifts around the clock for decades. The mansion in San Jose grew to scores of rooms, with staircases that ran up into ceilings, doors that opened onto blank walls or sheer drops, windows set into interior floors. She spent a large share of the fortune the rifle had earned on a structure meant, in the telling, to confuse or appease the dead. The work went on until she died in 1922. The Winchester Mystery House still stands, and tourists still file through it. It is the most literal monument any arms fortune ever produced, a woman so burdened by where the money came from that she tried to outrun it in wood and plaster, one nailed board at a time. Back in New Haven, the company faced a more practical kind of haunting. The liver-action rifles that had made Winchester famous were superb, and they were running into the limits of what their first designers had imagined. Rivals were improving. Smokeless powder was arriving, and it would demand stronger actions than the old guns could safely handle. The company that had bought its way to the top by hiring the right inventor in Benjamin Henry needed to do it again. The inventor it found was the most gifted gun designer who has ever lived. His name was John Moses Browning, a young gunsmith from Ogden, Utah, the son of a pioneer gunmaker. In 1883, a Winchester salesman came across a single-shot rifle Browning had built and was selling out west. The company traced the design back to him, bought it, and brought him into a relationship that would shape both their futures. Winchester produced that first Browning design as the model 1885 single shot. It was only the start. We are about halfway through. So one quick thing. If this is holding your attention, hit the like button. It helps the channel reach other people who would enjoy it. And leave a comment telling me which gun maker you want me to cover next. Alright, the man from Utah. Over the next 20 years, Browning sold Winchester dozens of designs, and the company turned them into some of the most successful firearms ever made. In 1886 came the Model 1886, a lever-action rifle with a locking system strong enough to handle the heavy hunting cartridges the older guns could not, refined into one of the finest lever guns of the century. Then in 1894 came the gun that outsold all the rest. The Winchester Model 1894, another Browning design, was a lever-action rifle built for the new smokeless cartridges, and the next year it was offered in a round called the .30-30 Winchester, the first American sporting cartridge designed from the start for smokeless powder. The Model 1894 became the deer rifle of North America. Generations of hunters learned to shoot on one. It stayed in production for more than 100 years and sold over 7 million units, the first sporting rifle in history to pass that mark. If the 1873 won the West in legend, the 1894 armed the continent in plain fact, hanging over millions of fireplaces and riding behind the seats of millions of trucks long after the West was settled. Browning did not only design rifles for Winchester, he gave the company the model 1897 pump-action shotgun, a gun so tough that American troops were still carrying it in the trenches of the First World War and the islands of the Second World War, where its short barrel and load of buckshot made it a close-range weapon the enemy protested was inhumane. He designed the model 1895, a lever-action rifle fed from a box magazine rather than a tube, which let it fire the pointed military cartridges a tube magazine could not safely hold. When the First World War came, Russia ordered roughly 300,000 Model 1895 rifles from Winchester in its own service caliber, and Browning's design went to war on the Eastern Front. For 2 decades, the bond between the inventor and the company was the most productive partnership in the history of the gun trade. Browning brought the genius. Winchester brought the factory, the money, and the name. And then it ended, over one design and one argument about how he would be paid. In 1902, Browning brought Winchester a new kind of shotgun, a semi-automatic that used the recoil of each shot to load the next, the first successful self-loading shotgun ever designed. He had always sold his work to Winchester outright, for a single lump sum. This time he wanted a royalty on every gun sold, because he understood correctly that the design was worth far more than a flat payment. Winchester refused. The company's leadership would not break its old habit of buying a design once and owning it forever. Browning walked out and never sold Winchester another gun. He carried the shotgun to Belgium, to a manufacturer named Fabrique Nationale in the town of Herstal, which agreed to the royalty and built the design as the Browning Auto 5. It became one of the best-selling shotguns of the century. The break cost Winchester the most valuable relationship it ever had, and it pushed the greatest gun designer alive into the arms of a foreign company whose name most Americans would never learn, though they would carry its products for the next 100 years. The factory in New Haven kept making excellent guns. It would never have another Browning. The company spent the early 20th century living partly on the speed the 19th had given it. The First World War brought a flood of contracts. Winchester made the pattern 1914 rifle for Britain and the model 1917 for the United States, along with Browning automatic rifles and enormous quantities of ammunition, and it expanded its plant on a huge scale to do the work. When the war ended in 1918, the contracts ended with it, and Winchester was left holding a swollen factory and heavy debt. Management tried to fill the empty space the way arms makers always try to fill it, by making goods for peacetime. Winchester put its name on roller skates, flashlights, kitchen knives, fishing tackle, and household hardware, and sold them through a chain of branded stores. None of it earned the way the war had. The hardware line drained money instead of replacing it. By the time the Great Depression hit, the company that had armed the West could not pay its bills. In 1931, it was bought out of receivership by the Western Cartridge Company, an ammunition maker run by the Olin family of Illinois. Western had been founded by Franklin Olin, and it was his son John Olin who took the wreck of Winchester and rebuilt it into a gun company again. Olin cut the failed sidelines, aimed the firm back at firearms and ammunition, and pressed for new designs. In 1936, Winchester brought out the Model 70, a bolt-action hunting rifle so well built and so accurate that shooters nicknamed it the rifleman's rifle, and it became the yardstick American bolt guns were measured against for decades. Under Olin, Winchester was a serious manufacturer once more. The Second World War put the company back on a full war footing. Winchester made M1 Garand rifles for the United States Army, and its engineers designed the M1 Carbine, a light, quick-handling rifle that the military adopted and that was built into millions by Winchester and a long list of contractors. The heart of the design, a short-stroke gas piston, came from David Marshall Williams, a North Carolina man who had worked out the principle while serving a prison sentence for killing a deputy during a raid on his moonshine still. Williams earned the nickname Carbine for the work, and his story was odd enough that Hollywood filmed it in 1952 with James Stewart in the lead. The Carbine was a real in-house achievement, a Winchester design carried by American troops from Europe to the Pacific. For a few years, the New Haven plant roared the way it had in 1918. Then the old pattern came back. The war ended, the contracts dried up, and Winchester slid into a long, slow decline. Labor costs in New Haven climbed. The aging factory was costly to run and harder every year to keep modern. Cheaper, better-equipped competitors took market share. Quality slipped on some lines as the company shaved costs to stay alive. Through the 1960s and 1970s, its owners put in less than the plant needed and took out what they could. In 1981, the Olin Corporation finally gave up on making guns. It sold the firearms operation to a group of its own employees who formed a new company called the U.S. Repeating Arms Company to keep building Winchester rifles and shotguns in New Haven. Olin held on to the ammunition business, and that split matters more than it sounds, because it is the reason the Winchester name today is cut in two. The employee-owned company struggled almost from the day it opened. Building guns in a century-old New Haven factory cost more than building them elsewhere, and U.S. Repeating Arms could not earn enough to close the gap. Within a few years, it was in financial trouble, and in 1987, it was bought by a foreign arms manufacturer. The buyer was Fabrique Nationale of Belgium, the same company. That same firm in Herstal that had welcomed John Browning and his self-loading shotgun in 1902, when Winchester would not pay him a royalty. 85 years after Winchester let the finest designer in the business walk out the door and into FN's arms, FN owned Winchester. By then, the Belgians also owned the Browning Arms Company itself, the firm Browning's family had built around his name. So the man who left, the company he left, and the company that carries his name all ended up under one Belgian roof. Oliver Winchester had built his empire by hiring the inventor everyone else overlooked. His successors lost the greatest inventor of all over a contract, and the loss came home 3 generations later in the form of ownership. For 2 more decades, the New Haven plant kept running under FN's control, turning out Model 70 rifles and Model 94 lever guns and pump shotguns on machinery that had been old when the employees bought it. The economics never recovered. On the 31st of March, 2006, the factory closed. After 139 years of continuous production in New Haven, Connecticut, the last gun came off the line and the doors shut for good. The building where the Henry had been improved into the Yellow Boy, where the 1873 and the 1894 and the Model 70 had all been born, fell quiet. Men who had spent their whole working lives there walked out a final time. The city that had grown up in part around the rifle works lost it.
The Winchester name did not die with the factory. It split. The firearms brand is now licensed, and the Winchester rifles and shotguns sold today are made under arrangements with the Browning and FN Group, built in plants around the world rather than in New Haven, with the famous Model 94 and Model 70 still in production under the name. The ammunition business went its own way entirely. It stayed with Olin, and Winchester ammunition is still made by Olin's Winchester division, one of the largest ammunition makers in the United States, supplying civilian shooters and the American military alike. So the word Winchester now lives in 2 places at once: on boxes of cartridges owned by an American chemical corporation, and on rifles built under license by the heirs of a Belgian firm. The thing worth sitting with is how little of this was about guns, at the level where the decisions got made.
Oliver Winchester could not design a rifle. He never tried. What he could do was look at a failing company full of weak-firing pistols and see, under the failure, a mechanism worth saving. He could look at a tool maker in his own shop and trust him to fix the one problem that mattered. He was also willing to take a product built to kill and build a business around it as coolly as he had built one around shirt collars. Because to him, a gun was first of all a thing to be made well and sold widely. The genius on the workbench belonged to Benjamin Henry, then to Nelson King, then above all to John Browning. The genius in the office belonged to Winchester, and it was a real kind of genius, the sort that knows exactly what it does not know and hires accordingly. That clarity is what his successors lost, and the company's whole later history reads as the long bill for losing it. They let Browning leave over a royalty, and the inventor who would have kept them ahead spent the rest of his life making other companies rich. The peacetime money they chased led into roller skates and flashlights and nearly drowned them. An ammunition family from Illinois saved them, ran them hard through 2 more wars, then sold them to their own workers, who in turn sold them to the Belgians, who had taken Browning in the first place. The factory in New Haven outlived Oliver Winchester by 126 years, and then it stopped, and the name floated free of the place that made it. Walk into a gun store today, and the Winchester name is still on the rack, on rifles built far from Connecticut by a company 3 owners removed from the man who coined it. Pick up a box of Winchester cartridges, and you are holding the product of a chemical company that bought the wreck in 1931 and kept the most valuable piece. The rifle that won the West, the slogan says. Most of the men and women who shaped the West are long forgotten, and the ones still remembered tend to be the loud ones, the gunfighters, and the generals. The man whose name got fixed to the whole era spent his working life in a clothing factory, and his fortune came from understanding manufacturing, judgment, and the strange, durable worth of a name. He never won a gunfight. He never needed to. The gun was his, and in the end the gun belonged to the legend, and the legend still moves product almost a century and a half after he was buried. A shirt maker did that. He hired the right people, bet on the right machine at the wrong moment, held on until the timing caught up, and put his name where the whole country could see it. The rifle did the rest of the work, and the rifle had his name on the side.
If you made it all the way to the end of this one, you clearly love this stuff, so do me a favor and subscribe, because there is a lot more of it coming in this series. And those 2 videos on your screen right now go even deeper into the companies and the people who built the weapons that shaped the modern world. Pick either one and keep going. I'll see you in the next one.